Okay, here I'm going to show you something I just learned because I haven't been knitting for very long, especially when it comes to cast-ons. I haven't paid much attention to my knitting. It's important to look back on what you've done, see if you're happy with it for any row that you do once you complete a row or even in the middle of a row, and see, is it what you thought it would be? In this case, for my cast-on, I was pulling my needle out at the very beginning of this row. I want you to notice how tight these stitches are. They're going to be harder to get through with this needle when I go back in and knit another row. Okay, they're tight, very tight right here. And then all of a sudden, look at here. All the stitches to me look so much better further down my row here. I'm at stitch 24 here. See how they're more uniform and looser and obviously going to be easier to knit with for my next row. And I wanted to show you why and what I discovered with the technique that I just showed you. I discovered one thing that made it much easier, and I want to show you something that I was concerned about but really made the stitches come out better by not being concerned about that particular part of the process. So, all right, have my thread ready to go to finish up this first row of cast on stitches that I will not count as number one. It will be simply counted as the edge. So when you're looking at patterns, your cast on row is not counted as row number one. When it tells you to do something after 10 rows, the next row will be counted as row number one. Okay, so here is what I discovered. I'm going to knit the last 2 stitches from my cast on. Okay, same as what I originally said. Put the needle in at the top, at the bottom of the top stitch. I'm going to wrap it around, wrap the yarn around my right hand needle, and then I'm going to bring it, and I like to help it a little bit with my finger, and I'm going to bring it through the top of that stitch down. Okay, and then I'm going to pull it out, not worrying about how loose it is at this point, how big the loop is. And again, I'm going to twist the yarn so that I get it around both needles. Now you'll notice right away I put the right needle below the left needle rather than waiting to do that. It's important to slowly do that when you cast on with this method. Now I can tighten a little bit, okay? And that's all the tension I need, okay? I don't need it really, really tight. That is the tension I was using towards the end of my cast on where I showed you that it looked better. I only need one more stitch, so I'm going to loop the yarn over the right hand needle. I help it out a little bit and bring it to the other side of the left hand needle and down through that top stitch. Bring it, make a big loop and bring it over the, twist the loop and bring it over the top of the left hand needle. Oops, see? Let me do that again. Twist it, and I want to, at the same time that I bring it over the needle, I want to keep this right hand needle behind the left hand needle. And at this point is where I can tighten it some. Okay, I've got 26 stitches. Let's see how those last 2 stitches turned out. I'm going to pull the needle out. Okay. Let's say that looks pretty good. And you'll notice it's not, I can tighten it a little bit, but you don't want it too tight. If you want to, and you'll see why in a minute. Okay, let me make sure I've got 26 stitches. I always like to check just to make sure so that I can follow the pattern exactly as it's written. All right, let's count. I'm going to count by 2. So make sure I have 26 stitches for the baby booties that are cast on, or CO for cast on. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26. Perfect. Okay. Now, if I had over 100 stitches, like for a blanket, another thing you can do is put a little marker like at every 10 stitches or every 20 stitches. So that way if you get off count when you're counting 100 to 100, then you don't have to recount the whole row of cast on stitches. Okay. All right. So again, as I said in the beginning, I'm going to put my, I'm going to keep my work on the left-hand side. Always, always, always. I'm going to loop the yarn over, the working yarn over this finger. Okay. And I like to do this to start with, and sometimes I end up like this, as long as I have this here so I can tighten and loosen these two fingers to allow the yarn to keep a good tension. Okay, I want you to notice something on this cast on row. Here is your tail. Okay, it's a little long. I'd rather have it, my preference is to leave it a little long. I can weave in some of it to the work when I'm done and then cut it off. Okay, I've got my work ready to go. Now I need to pick up your other needle, and we're going to start our first row of just plain knitting. When I say stop, stop. Okay, it's going to be just a little different than the cast on knitting. All right, basically the same but different at the end. All right, so again we're working from the top stitch. Not the end that has the tail, but the end that's attached to the skein of work. All right. Now I'm going to put once again, just like casting on with the knit, I'm going to put my needle in from the bottom of the top stitch. I like to kind of hold these other stitches so I don't lose them. Okay. Once again, we loop over the right hand needle. Once again, we pull the yarn through the first stitch, but stop here. This is where you stop. This part's different. Guess what? You don't have to do the twisty, loopy thing now for you're making a knitted row now. You're just going to pull that stitch off of your left-hand needle. You've now made one stitch to go on your first row of knitting. Okay. So straight knitting, after the cast on, you just pull the stitch off after you pull it through the top stitch. After you pull the yarn through the working yarn through the top stitch. Once I'm going to demonstrate that a couple more times, put the needle in, just like you did for cast on, through the bottom of the top stitch. You might want to hold these other stitches just so you can see better. You want to loop your yarn over, or you can just do your needle like that and scoop it over your right hand needle. You want to pull it from the left side of the left needle to the right side. Keep that tip in contact of the right hand needle to the left hand needle. See, my tip never leaves this needle, this left hand needle, so that I don't lose that yarn I just scooped up. Okay, again, I don't need a long loop for knitting. I've just made my second stitch of row 1, and I pull it over. It doesn't need to be tight. It can be loose. Everybody knits differently. That's why I explained the gauge to you. Your gauge of knitting might have bigger stitches than somebody else's, so you may need to use a smaller needle depending on what you're knitting. Okay. We'll go over gauge some more on another lesson. All right, once again, I'm going to show you the knit stitch as is for making row 1. Okay, once again, we still keep these stitches on this needle, so sometimes I hold it with this finger. You might want to do that to begin with, so you get more confident with where your yarn is and, keeping track of your where you're at in the process. Okay, so once again, I come under that top thread. I'm holding both of these. I'm looping the yarn around the right hand needle so that I can get it through that top stitch. Okay, I'm pulling it to the other side of the needle. See, here's the yarn, it's on the other side, and then it's coming down through that top stitch, but this is as far as I go for knitting. I don't need to make the big loop and twist it around because I'm not making more stitches for this needle. I'm making more stitches that'll come off onto the right needle. Now I kind of like to look at what I'm doing. Like I see the cast on and I see the knit stitches. Over time you want to be able to recognize what knit stitches look like specifically, because you'll go to another type of stitch, which is usually the purl stitch, which looks different than the knit stitch. Okay, all right. I'm still holding my yarn over these two fingers at least. All right, and I'm holding the yarn on each needle. I like to pull it up a little bit as I go, so it's easier to handle on both needles, but I keep my finger here to keep it in place. Some people hold their yarn way out here when they're knitting too, so you can play with that if you want when you're practicing. I generally don't do that, but if you're going to continue to use a continental style with your yarn in this hand rather than the yarn being held in this hand, the right hand, it appears to me, I'm still learning the continental style because I started with the English style, which is the yarn being held in this hand. The continental style, most people have a longer amount of yarn, so they're not knitting in what's called the closed hand closer to the yarn. That takes a little practice, I believe, and I prefer, personally, to knit with the yarn closer to the needle, the working yarn that is. Okay, one more time just for good measure. Underneath, over, through the stitch. And I sort of move my finger with the yarn so I can get the yarn over on the other side of that left-hand needle, and keep that point right here in contact with the left-hand needle. Pull the yarn through and pull it off. So you only need to pull it through when you're making rows of knitting. Okay, we're going to stop the video right here, and then I will show you what it looks like once I finish the first row.